the morning sun filtered through the grand, vaulted ceilings of the Bundeshaus in Frankfurt, illuminating the chamber where the Federal Council of the Deutsche Föderation convened. The air, crisp and hinting at the mild German spring, carried the faint scent of old oak and polished brass, a tangible link to the nation's founding. The architecture, while incorporating modern functionalities like discrete holographic displays and integrated climate control, echoed the classical and neo-Gothic styles popular in the early 19th century. This was not the Frankfurt Parliament that had faltered and failed to unite Germany in a stormy 1848, this was the enduring seat of a truly unified German state, one that had risen from the ashes of the Napoleonic Wars almost 2 centuries ago. In May 2025, the Deutsche Föderation stood as a stable, prosperous, and profoundly liberal European power, a testament to a historical path that had fundamentally altered the course of the continent and, indeed, the world. This pivotal divergence occurred not with a single, dramatic stroke, but in a sustained, fervent period between 1806 and 1815. The fragmentation of the ancient Holy Roman Empire, the profound humiliation of foreign occupation under Napoleon's heel, and the powerful stirrings of a pan-Germanic national identity had converged into an unstoppable force. The established German monarchies, particularly Prussia and Austria, found themselves weakened and discredited by their defeats against Napoleon, creating a void that an organized, popular movement could fill. Their internal weaknesses and their preoccupation with their own dynastic interests prevented them from effectively suppressing the burgeoning calls for national unity and reform that swept through the smaller states. Unlike the fragmented Congress of Vienna of a different history, which merely cobbled together a loose German confederation dominated by the rivalry of Prussia and Austria, this era saw the birth of a different, more cohesive vision. A unique constellation of forces had coalesced. Leading intellectuals, many of whom had been deeply influenced by the ideals of the Enlightenment and the nascent philosophical currents of German idealism, thinkers like Kant and Fichte, whose emphasis on universal reason and individual moral autonomy resonated deeply, championed the cause of a united, freedom-oriented Germany. They infused the burgeoning Romantic nationalism with a strong liberal underpinning, pushing for a shared identity rooted in civic participation rather than ethnic purity or monarchical fealty. Figures like Heinrich Friedrich Karl von Stein, though an aristocrat, possessed a reformist zeal that found common ground with burgeoning nationalist thinkers like Ernst Moritz Arndt and Joseph Goebbels. They advocated fiercely for strong press freedom, an independent judiciary, and crucially, the civilian control of the military, principles they believed were essential to prevent any future despotic rule. Their arguments resonated deeply with a populace exhausted by perpetual warfare and arbitrary monarchical power. Crucially, they were joined by reform-minded statesmen from the myriad smaller and medium-sized German states, Saxony, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, Hanover, and others, who saw an opportunity to secure their autonomy within a larger, more stable framework, rather than be perpetually caught between the ambitions of Berlin and Vienna. The influence of the more autocratic Kingdom of Prussia and the vast, multi-ethnic Austrian Empire was significantly diminished, not through conquest, but by the overwhelming moral and popular momentum for a new, inclusive German identity. Popular pressure, often manifesting in widespread public demonstrations and the formation of numerous civic associations, provided the indispensable leverage to overcome initial monarchical resistance. Furthermore, a shared international desire for regional stability after decades of Napoleonic turmoil meant that external powers, particularly Britain and Russia, were less inclined to actively undermine a broadly popular and seemingly stable German unification movement, provided it was not overtly aggressive or expansionist. The wars of liberation against Napoleon provided the crucible. Veteran commanders, disillusioned by the inefficiencies of disparate state armies and inspired by the common struggle against a foreign oppressor, lent their weight to the cause. As Napoleon's grip faltered after the disastrous Russian campaign and the Battle of Leipzig, the leaders of this nascent movement did not wait for the squabbling monarchs to dictate the future. Instead, they seized the opportunity of the post-Napoleonic power vacuum. They convened a provisional assembly in Frankfurt in late 1815, akin to a much more successful and enduring version of the later Frankfurt Parliament. This assembly, fueled by widespread support and a clear vision, quickly transformed into a constituent body. By 1818, After intense but ultimately constructive debates, they drafted and ratified a remarkably liberal and federal constitution. This constitution enshrined universal male suffrage, later expanded to include women in the early 20th century, a strong bicameral parliament, the Bundesrat representing states and the Reichstag representing the people, and a clear delineation of powers between the federal government and the individual states. Crucially, it included a robust Bill of Rights guaranteeing civil liberties, freedom of speech, assembly, and religion, and established an independent judiciary. The head of state was a largely ceremonial, elected president, Bundespräsident, initially chosen from among respected elder statesmen, ensuring that no single monarchical line could dominate. This early unification, forged under a truly parliamentary and progressive banner, rather than a later, militaristic, and Prussian-led empire, unleashed cascading effects across 2 centuries, profoundly altering Europe's trajectory. From its very inception, the Deutsche Föderation fostered a political culture centered on federalism, civil liberties, and parliamentary democracy. This wasn't merely a set of written rules but a lived reality, deeply ingrained in the national consciousness. Regional identities, far from being suppressed, remained incredibly strong and vibrant, celebrated within the unified framework. Each state, or land, retained significant autonomy over its education, cultural affairs, local governance, and even certain aspects of its legal system. This allowed for diverse cultural expressions and acted as a powerful incubator for social experiments, where different regions could pioneer new approaches to public policy. For instance, while the federal government set national educational standards, individual states like Bavaria might emphasize vocational training and apprenticeships, while Baden-Württemberg focused on highly specialized scientific and engineering curricula, leading to a dynamic and competitive educational landscape across the nation. This constant internal innovation often served as a blueprint for federal reforms, ensuring that the country's policies remained adaptable and responsive to evolving societal needs. Indeed, a groundbreaking legal reform ensuring tenant rights, pioneered in Saxony, gradually spread across the entire federation after years of successful implementation and debate, becoming a national standard. The Industrial Revolution, while certainly occurring within this union, unfolded with notably different social dynamics. Without the pervasive influence of a rigid, conflict-oriented aristocracy dominating the economy and setting societal norms, capital and labor found different avenues for interaction. The strong founding principles translated into an early emphasis on worker welfare and education. Labor unions, while still facing challenges, gained a legitimate voice much earlier than in many other industrializing nations, often cooperating with progressive industrialists and state initiatives to implement reforms. Child labor laws, standardized working hours, and nascent social security systems were established incrementally through parliamentary consensus rather than forced by revolutionary pressure. This created a more equitable distribution of industrial wealth and a stronger, more educated workforce, fostering innovation from the ground up rather than relying solely on top-down directives. While periods of economic tension and strikes certainly occurred, the embedded mechanisms for negotiation and compromise, coupled with a genuine commitment to social mobility, largely averted the widespread class conflicts and revolutionary upheavals seen elsewhere. This commitment to social progress also meant that, by the mid-20th century, the Federation was a pioneer in environmental protection, integrating sustainability into its industrial practices far earlier than many global counterparts. Major industrial sectors, like the burgeoning chemical and automotive industries, focused not just on output but on developing cleaner production methods, driven by both public demand and state incentives. Scientific and cultural advancements thrived in this environment of intellectual freedom and regional competition. Universities, decentralized and competing for top minds across the Federation, became renowned centers of learning, attracting students and scholars from across the globe. The arts, too, bloomed, free from the shadow of state-imposed militarism or rigid nationalist dogma. Indeed, the very aesthetic of a peaceful, unified Germany fostered unique artistic movements. Without the grim realities that led to Expressionism's reflections on pain and anxiety in another history, a profound cultural movement emerged in the early 20th century, the movement for a shared future. This artistic current celebrated the multifaceted nature of the Federation's regions, emphasizing cooperation and the synthesis of diverse traditions. It manifested in monumental yet strikingly light architectural forms, often incorporating natural elements and communal spaces, and in syncretic musical genres that blended the rich folklore of the Federation's various lands into harmonious new compositions, celebrated annually at the Bundesfest in Frankfurt. Its influence extended to literature, where authors explored themes of interconnectedness, individual freedom within a diverse society, and the peaceful resolution of differences, rather than the dark, existential anxieties prevalent in other timelines' literary canons. This subtle yet profound shift shaped the very aesthetic of a peaceful, unified German nation. Frankfurt, as the capital, truly embodied this spirit. Its broad boulevards, meticulously planned public spaces, and grand parliamentary buildings reflected its long history of constitutional governance and civic participation. It was not just a political hub but a nexus of international diplomacy, finance, and culture, constantly buzzing with delegates, traders, and artists from around the world. Its financial institutions, built on transparency and stability, became a global standard. Berlin, while a major urban center and a historical site of scientific and artistic innovation, never became the same imperial capital. Instead, it evolved as a truly diverse, open metropolis within the Federation, known for its avant-garde arts scene, thriving intellectual salons, and vibrant international communities, unburdened by the weight of centralized power and military parades. Its universities rivaled Frankfurt's in specific fields, fostering a healthy academic competition that further propelled intellectual progress. The geopolitical landscape of Europe was profoundly transformed by this alternate path, demonstrating how the very absence of certain historical catalysts can prevent widespread catastrophe. Without a powerful, aggressive Prussian kingdom pushing for dominance across the German states, the deep-seated Franco-German rivalry that defined much of the late 19th and early 20th centuries in another history was simply absent. The Franco-Prussian War never occurred. This meant no humiliation for France in 1871, no loss of Alsace-Lorraine, and thus, no simmering revanchist sentiments consuming French politics for decades. Instead, France and the Deutsche Federation developed a relationship of more balanced competition, often cooperating on matters of trade, technological exchange, and diplomacy, recognizing their mutual benefit from stability rather than engaging in destructive rivalry. There were periods of tension, certainly, particularly during economic downturns, but they lacked the existential, all-consuming bitterness that characterized the relationship in our own history. Diplomatic channels remained open and robust, emphasizing negotiated solutions over military confrontations. The Austrian Empire faced a starkly different trajectory. Without the constant pressure of the German question, the brutal competition for leadership of the German states, and without the rise of a powerful, expansionist German power to its north, Austria-Hungary was free to pursue different internal reforms. While still grappling with its multi-ethnic complexities, it focused more on administrative decentralization and economic development within its existing borders, rather than projecting power outwards. Its relationship with its German neighbor was one of a large, historically significant, but separate power, engaged in healthy economic and cultural exchange. Over the 20th century, this trajectory allowed Austria-Hungary to transform itself, likely into a looser Danubian federation or a powerful Central European economic bloc, managing its diverse populations through greater autonomy and cultural recognition, rather than collapsing catastrophically under the weight of external pressures and internal nationalist insurgencies. The overall balance of power in Europe was inherently more stable. The aggressive, 1871-style German expansionism and the subsequent naval arms race with Britain, the frantic scramble for colonies, and the complex, rigid alliance systems that directly led to World War I were entirely circumvented. The specific triggers, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, might still have occurred, but without the underlying powder keg of militarized, nationalistic tension and interlocking defensive treaties, a regional crisis would not have escalated into a global conflagration. The 20th century's major conflicts as we know them were significantly altered or avoided entirely. What did happen then? The 20th century was marked not by global war, but by periods of intense economic competition, diplomatic maneuvering, and smaller, localized conflicts, primarily driven by decolonization or internal unrest in various regions. For instance, the scramble for Africa might have been more about establishing trade protectorates and resource extraction agreements rather than outright military conquest of vast territories, leading to different, though still exploitative, colonial patterns. The path to decolonization in the mid-20th century might have been smoother, perhaps even initiated earlier by European powers themselves, influenced by the liberal principles increasingly dominant within the Federation. While regional conflicts and proxy wars still occurred in various parts of the globe, fueled by ideological differences or resource disputes, they rarely escalated into multi-continental or global conflicts. Major economic downturns, such as a global recession in the 1930s, still presented challenges, but without the extremist political outcomes and widespread destabilization seen in other timelines, they fostered greater international cooperation and financial regulation. There was no single, devastating global conflict that crippled economies and spawned extremist ideologies on a vast scale. The devastating global scale of the two world wars, with their immense human cost and subsequent radical political upheavals, simply never transpired. This absence of catastrophic wars had profound and lasting effects. The European Union, far from being born from the ashes of war, likely formed much earlier, perhaps even in the mid-20th century, and certainly in a different configuration. With the Deutsche Föderation as a key, stable, freedom-oriented founding member, its experience of successful internal diversity and democratic stability provided a powerful, living model for multinational cooperation. This cooperative framework meant a more cohesive and influential European entity, deeply integrated and having avoided the deep scars of 20th-century global conflicts. It was not a post-war rebuilding project, but a continuous evolution towards greater integration and shared prosperity, championed by figures like the Federation's pioneering diplomat, Alara Schmidt, who tirelessly worked to bridge historical divides. Relationships between European powers, and with the rest of the world, were built on a different historical precedent, favoring cooperation and diplomacy over destructive rivalry, fostering a more interconnected and less suspicious global community. International organizations, perhaps a more robust and effective successor to the League of Nations than our timeline's United Nations, played a more central role in resolving disputes and promoting global development. Our story focuses on Dr. Alistair Hoffman, a renowned historian and political scientist at the University of Frankfurt. Alistair was a leading authority on the unwritten century, his academic work exploring in intricate detail how the early, liberal unification of Germany fundamentally reshaped the 20th century, sparing it the catastrophes of global conflicts. His office, typically a sanctuary of academic rigor, today served as a broadcast studio. The soft glow of his interactive holographic display, currently showing a fluid map of Europe illustrating his points, illuminated his thoughtful features. His gaze briefly swept over an ancient, treasured map of Europe hanging above his desk, a map that predated the very divisions that defined other, more tragic centuries. He unconsciously tapped his fingers rhythmically on the worn cover of an old, leather-bound book beside his keyboard, a volume of historical essays that served as his personal talisman, a silent witness to unfulfilled histories. This simple gesture betrayed a deeper connection. His great-grandmother, a suffragette and pioneering educator, had been a delegate to one of the Federation's earliest women's assemblies, imbuing Alistair with a profound, almost familial sense of responsibility for the ideals his nation upheld. Looking at the map, he'd often recall his grandmother's stories of how her family's ancestral village could have been a battlefield had history veered into different realities, a deeply personal understanding of the price of peace. Consider the year 1914, Alistair began, his voice calm yet compelling, resonating with the quiet authority of a scholar who had dedicated his life to understanding what might have been, and what was. In another history, a dark echo across dimensions, that year marked the precipice of a devastating global conflict. A war fueled by intricate, brittle alliances, aggressive nationalism, and imperial ambitions, particularly those stemming from a newly militarized German empire bent on asserting its place in the sun. Here, in our timeline, 1914 was simply another year in the burgeoning prosperity of the Deutsche Föderation, a testament to the enduring strength of its principles of liberty. He transitioned the map to show the political landscape of 1914 in their world, the stable, federal German state at its center, a more pragmatic France, a more internally focused and stable Austrian Empire, and different, less precarious configurations of alliances. The absence of the Franco-Prussian War meant no revanchist sentiments consuming French politics. There was no deep wound that festered for decades. The lack of a bellicose German power meant no frantic naval arms race with Britain, no aggressive posturing for colonial expansion. The very triggers for what would have been the First Great War, the system of rigid alliances, the specific power dynamics, the prevailing ideologies of dominance, simply did not exist in the same way. Alistair then discussed how this profound divergence impacted the mid-20th century, a period of immense suffering and other realities. Without the immense economic devastation and political extremism that inevitably follow a great war, the horrific conditions for the rise of totalitarian regimes like Nazism in Germany never materialized. Our political discourse remained largely within the bounds of democratic debate, no matter how heated. The Second Global Conflict, as imagined in those dark other histories, with its unspeakable atrocities and industrial-scale destruction, was simply an inconceivable scenario, an alien concept to our collective memory. He clicked a button, and the map shifted to a simplified representation of 2025, showing the deep integration of European nations within a strong, cooperative framework, a vibrant tapestry of shared values and mutual benefit. The Deutsche Föderation, with its long-standing tradition of constitutional governance and federalism, became a natural leader in European integration. Its centuries-old experience of successfully managing internal diversity and maintaining democratic stability provided a powerful, living model for multinational cooperation, fostering genuine partnership rather than perpetual competition. Alistair concluded, his voice imbued with a quiet pride, "Our history, the history of the Deutsche Föderation, is a testament to the profound impact of foundational principles. The choice made in the crucible of the Napoleonic Wars, to unite not under the banner of empire and militarism, but under the banner of liberty, cooperation, and federation, did not erase all conflict or challenge, for human nature remains complex. Even in our world, there are political disagreements, economic fluctuations, and social debates. Yet, it fundamentally altered the character of our shared human journey, demonstrating that even the greatest historical forces can be shaped and guided by the foresight and moral courage of a single generation." As the virtual lecture concluded, the holographic display faded, leaving Alistair in the quiet hum of his office. He felt more than just professional satisfaction. It was a deep, almost personal sense of gratitude, a profound pride in the path his nation had chosen, a path that had deftly navigated away from the bloody shadows of other, imagined realities. This history, his history, was for him more than just academic work, it was a living embodiment of an alternative, more hopeful trajectory. The enduring Bundeshaus, the vibrant, diverse streets of Frankfurt, and the very stability of their modern world were all a direct, beautiful result of a history chosen centuries ago.